Health. It's Dr. Deborah Thompson here from the One Health Lessons team. And today we have Dr. Jennifer Gardy joining us. Dr. Jennifer Gardy is the Deputy Director of Surveillance, Data, and Epidemiology on the malaria team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you so much, Dr. Gardy, for joining us.
It's such a pleasure. Thanks for having me, and congrats on fitting the whole title in there. I know it's a lot of words, but well done.
Thank you. It's a lot of words, but it is very well deserved. You have done so much incredible work, and you still are doing incredible work with your position today. So I wanted to dive in and hear from you. What's your story? How on earth did you get to this position today? And I'll leave it at that.
Oh my gosh, I could fill a really long time with the whole story. I'll try and pick the most exciting parts. If you go all the way back to the beginning, when I was growing up, I saw Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman, and I thought that looked like just about the most interesting career in the world, tracking infectious diseases, running through jungles, trying to catch monkeys and use them to stop outbreaks of lethal hemorrhagic fevers. I thought that sounded fascinating. So my educational route kind of took me through combinations of studying infectious diseases, genetics, genomics eventually, whole genome sequencing, and all the computational bioinformatics analysis that went along with that. So basically, educational route was a bachelor's degree and went to grad school, did a PhD in computational biology studying infectious diseases, and then ended up going to work after a postdoc. I ended up working at the British Columbia Center for Disease Control, which was really sort of my first public health job. And there, what I was interested in was, how do you take DNA sequencing? How do you take genomics, and how do you take the power of next generation sequencing technologies that make it very easy, very cheap, very fast to sequence a whole genome from a virus, from a bacterium, from a parasite? How do you take those technologies and apply them within public health to answer epidemiological questions? How do you understand how an outbreak of infectious disease started? How is it spreading amongst a community? What do those patterns of spread tell you about how you might stop that particular outbreak? So I spent about a decade at BC CDC. I was also a faculty member at the University of British Columbia in the School of Population and Public Health. And really, over that decade, just kept poking around at this notion of what we now call genomic epidemiology, or pathogen genomic epidemiology, to understand how genomics could really be a transformative tool. And my work was, because I was working at the British Columbia Center for Disease Control, which was a provincial public health agency, my work was very provincial focused. My backyard was British Columbia, and that was it. But because this was such a new and emerging field, I was often invited to speak at conferences around the world. I got to meet some really interesting people that were using the same genomic epidemiology approach elsewhere. And I really kind of got a thirst for global health. At the same time, I was really being introduced to the emerging concept of One Health, and how, in addition to looking at human health, which is what I'd been doing for the last decade, we could learn so many interesting things from wildlife surveillance, for example, or environmental surveillance. So this combination of seeing all this cool stuff that was happening in the global health space, and really sort of seeing the opportunities to go beyond just samples derived from human infection to really take a more holistic look at the environment, led me to my current career at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And there, my portfolio, which is surveillance, data, and epidemiology, it really comprises sort of three bins of work. One is improving routine surveillance systems for malaria, and those include both surveillance for human disease as well as entomological surveillance, looking for the Anopheles mosquito vector, tracking different Anopheles species, their behaviors, etc. So we do surveillance. We do genomic epidemiology for malaria, recognizing that both parasite and mosquito genetic and genomic information can be really useful intelligence when it comes to malaria epidemiology. And we also support a lot of modeling work as well. So taking these innovative data types, whether it's sort of routine surveillance data or newer genetic and genomic data, and using it to really understand malaria epidemiology and make predictions about how different types of interventions might work together and be optimized for deployment in a specific area. to really drive malaria burden down. So it's finally a chance to take some of the work that I was doing in BC on genomic epidemiology, expand it out into that global health context, expand it into a pathogen like malaria that does have a very One Health angle to it, in that it's a vector-borne disease and is very much the function of not only the host, not only the vector, not only the parasite, but also the surrounding environment. So I get to sort of bring those things to the table and pull in a bunch of other interesting stuff, the data science, the modeling, all sorts of innovative epidemiological approaches. So it took a while, but I feel like I finally achieved that Dustin Hoffman in Outbreak goal, getting to do really, really interesting science. I'm not chasing a monkey around in the jungle with a butterfly net preventing viral hemorrhagic fevers, but I certainly do get out into some very strange places, and I guess I chase mosquitoes around with a mosquito net more than anything.
Wow. Wow. What a story. I love it. And it started with a movie, right? That was your first exposure to anything One Health related.
It's so funny, and it's such a terrible movie. If you look back on it, you're like, oh my God, this is a disaster. Contagion, which came out much later, a far better movie. If you're going to watch an outbreak movie, Contagion is really one of the better ones out there. But I guess even though it was a bit of a silly start, it did lead me down a very productive pathway.
Yeah, yeah. But Dustin Hoffman's a good actor, so go figure. That's incredible. So then when, for the last 15 years or so, the term One Health has just started to become, I don't even want to say mainstream, I don't want to jinx it, but it's a little bit popular, let's say that. Do you feel like all throughout your education and then your academic life, do you feel like the concept had been there the whole time and now people are starting to just label it? Or do you think people are actually now seeing it for what it is? What do you think of the evolution?
That's an excellent question. I don't know when the first time I actually heard the term One Health used was, but I can tell you that it was certainly not in any of my educational training. It was never anything that popped up in any of the coursework that I'd done. Certainly the concepts were there, and I think anybody that comes from the infectious diseases space, or particularly infectious disease ecology, those concepts have always been there. The notion that human health, animal health, environmental health, and planetary health, even climate, for example, they're all so intimately intertwined that disruptions in one will lead to disruptions in the other. Those concepts have always been there, but I don't think they've ever been, until recently, brought together under a really unifying banner and really shared through conferences, through onehealthlessons.com, for example. Just actual learning opportunities, I don't think have been there. So that's kind of the exciting thing now, is to see these concepts really formalized, forming the basis of actual educational curricula, which is fantastic, having people that identify as One Health practitioners. And I really think that the current COVID-19 pandemic is only just going to underscore the importance of a One Health approach. We know nothing is certain about the next pandemic other than that there will be one, and it will likely be a zoonotic virus spilling over from an animal population. And those first cases are going to be occurring in people at that animal-human interface, whether it's veterinarians picking up unusual signals in livestock or wildlife, whether it's people at a market suddenly falling ill and maybe detecting clusters of cases in market environments or in farming environments or slaughterhouse environments. That's the only thing we can be guaranteed of when it comes to the next pandemic. So I think this is being very instructive and will be sort of that inflection point where One Health becomes a lot more codified and taught formally.
Right. Well, here's hoping for the future. So, when I was in school and I first heard about One Health in veterinary school, not in my undergraduate, but in veterinary school, and when I heard about the concept, there was no real way to become a One Health practitioner at that time. Now it looks like there's a possibility to become one. What type of skills, in your opinion, would be valuable for the upcoming One Health advocates who want to practice actively in the One Health space?
Excellent question. And I think, a lot of it boils down to the skills that you need to be an interdisciplinary scientist. Is when it comes down to training, we all train in 1, 2, maybe if you're incredibly gifted, 3 areas of specialty, but we tend to have a fairly limited deep dive focus. But the skills that help you appreciate other people's deep technical expertise and pick out bits of those fields that are most useful to your own work, or the skills that help you draw connections between what you're doing and what, say for example, you're a trained infectious disease epidemiologist and you focus on human health. The ability to go out there, read the literature, synthesize thoughts and trends from other domains, apply techniques from your own learning and see how those roll out in a field like veterinary epidemiology, or a field like climate science, for example. Being able to speak the languages of those other domains. A lot of it really boils down to, I think, communication skills and curiosity, just being, insatiably hungry about learning about other domains. And I think one of the things that served me particularly well over the years, before One Health was a thing that I was really aware of and engaged with, I still had a very multidisciplinary career path. It was bringing together genomics, bioinformatics, network science, information visualization, traditional epidemiology. It was really combining a bunch of strange things. And those strange things were all things that I'd just been fascinated by on my career path. So by dabbling in quite a few little things and getting a sense of best practices and how do you communicate information and what does network structure mean for disease spread, things that were a little outside my domain but were still of interest to me, I was able to pull those together and be one of the folks that kind of helped found modern genomic epidemiology and taking this DNA-based approach to studying disease transmission networks. So that same sort of like, I'm interested in this and this and this and this and this and this and this. Those are the skills that will serve anybody well, but particularly a One Health practitioner. If you're curious about what's going on in other fields, if you can see how concept A or idea X from domain Y or domain Z, how it relates to what you're doing, that's really, I think, the most important thing. Curiosity, communication skills, and connecting the dots. A lot of C's, basically.
A lot of C's, but important ones. Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that's excellent advice. It reminds me of when we go into classrooms and we talk to the little 8-year-olds and we say, who here is curious? And some of them raise their hand. Yeah. Curious, you're going to be an excellent scientist.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the funny thing. So many people are like, well, I'm no scientist, but anybody that's curious is a scientist. And I remember speaking to wildlife veterinarians in BC. I knew quite a few of them who were doing really, really interesting work. And every once in a while, you talk to one of them and say, well, I'm not an infectious disease epidemiologist. I'm like, no, but you are. You're somebody who is looking at their patient population. It's got, fur and different numbers of legs than the human population. For sure, yes, it's a different population, but it's still very much infectious disease epidemiology. You are looking at a population, you are making hypotheses about what's going on, using data to explore those hypotheses. And so you have these fantastic veterinary pathologists, for example, who were key to identifying Cryptococcus gaddii in British Columbia, where I used to work, emerging fungal infection, and it was sharp-eyed vets who had spotted it in equine populations in horses at first. So yeah, no matter what you do, if you're curious, if you spot something interesting and you want to follow up on that, I mean, that's the perfect definition of a scientist.
Yeah, love it. Love it. I know that your time is very precious, so I'll ask one last question.
For sure.
If you have advice for the upcoming generation of One Health professionals, One Health advocates from any type of discipline, I hear you say curiosity is very important. So follow your curiosity, follow your passion. It's like what you did. You said you were following the dots and it all worked out in the end. Staying creative and focusing on communication. Is there anything else that you'd like to add in? How do you get that dream job, or how do you get One Health to be an everyday thing for you?
I think, yeah, so much of it does really go back to that idea of curiosity. And if something is interesting, follow up on it. You'll end up collecting a really fascinating series of experiences that will combine to give you a very unique viewpoint. So if One Health is the direction that you want to take, dabbling in infectious disease, in epidemiology, in microbiology, in virology, in veterinary and wildlife health, in environmental science, in climate science, in understanding the urban and natural world interface, all of these things, coupled to things from other areas too, skills like data science, for example, and that sort of analytical or quantitative mindset. Qualitative research and qualitative inquiry is just as important, understanding people's attitudes and behaviors and practices. So you can have all these sort of domain specific kind of scientific things that you're interested in, like the infectious disease epi, or like genome sequencing in my case. But then there are all of these broad bins of skills, whether it's the qualitative, whether it's the quantitative, whether it's something like visualization. These are all things that you can explore and bring those foundational skills, combine them with your domain specific expertise, and just carve out a really interesting place for yourself. So yeah, be curious, always be teaching yourself new skills, and recognize that, at some point, 10, 15, 20 years down the road in your career, you're going to look at where you are and like, this is so incredibly cool. Like, how did I get this job? And you got that job because you created a really interesting path for yourself.
I love it. I love it. Follow your bliss, right?
Yeah, exactly. That is a much more concise way of saying what I just said.
I love it. And with that, thank you so much, Dr. Gardy, for joining us today on One Health Lessons. It's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to future conversations.
That was super fun. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Take care.
You too.